All right, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about the Shannara Chronicles? Stick around and find out. Da-da-dum, 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 da-da-dum. All right. I totally feel like playing Elder Scrolls, specifically Elder Scrolls Oblivion, I think, after watching the pilot for the Shannara Chronicles. Actually, episodes 1 and 2, which you can watch on Amazon right now. I'm Peter Franston from ChristianGeekCentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of the Shannara Chronicles, episodes 1 and 2. All right, so the synopsis is that if you're not familiar with the books in the series by Terry Brooks, is that hundreds of years after a global apocalypse, technology is long forgotten. There are just kind of remnants of it that you can see covered in overgrown vegetation, and the Earth is now inhabited by elves, trolls, and gnomes, in addition to the human race. There has been peace for many years, but the Elcrease, a magical tree imprisoning an ancient race of demons, is dying, and the demon army is slowly returning to Earth one at a time to destroy everything. Only the elven princess Amberly can save the Elcrease, and the powerful druid Alanon has awakened from his suspended animation to find the half-elf Will Omsford, who is destined to awaken his dormant magical powers to protect the Princess Amberly from the demons who hunt her. Freaking awesome nerdy fantasy stuff. I mean, this is I loved the series. It was the first book series, fantasy book series that I read that was like serious adult fantasy. Before then, I'd read what's his name? I can't even remember. But Piers Anthony. I'd read a bunch of Piers Anthony in junior high, and then sometime in junior high, I first read the Sword of Shannara. I think it was actually one of the later books, and I just loved the tone and how character driven it was. He took you inside of the feelings and the fears of the characters in these stories, and it was largely a ripoff, especially the Sword of Shannara, of what had come before 1977 or 8 or whenever the Sword of Shannara was first published. In the Lord of the Rings, it was definitely used the same kind of plot skeleton, but it was so much more approachable in the prose, the way it was written, compared to the dusty old language of J.R.R. Tolkien. Anyway, that's my background as far as like with the books and the kind of things I like. This series is, like I said, I was a big fan of the books, the Shannara books. I'm not a fan of the Word and Void series, which takes place in modern day Earth, and Terry Brooks eventually tried to bridge. Well, he did bridge the gap and said that these are the same continuity: the Word and Void, and then the future yet fantasy medieval looking world of Shannara are part of the same continuity. Those bridging books and the Word and Void books, they were okay, but I wasn't really into them. This TV series seems to be loosely based on Elfstones of Shannara, the same characters, the same basic plot, and I think that's a good move given the Sword of Shannara's similarities to Lord of the Rings. I think if they would have started there, people would have been like, this is just a knockoff of Lord of the Rings, because it hasn't been that long since we saw those movies. Even though, as I said, I really enjoy the story of the Sword of Shannara, I think, more than the Lord of the Rings. Well, maybe not the movies. We'll see. I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, I love serious fantasy where magic is visible. That's very important to me. That was a huge shortcoming I felt for my tastes in the Lord of the Rings movies. I like to see that freaking purple lightning flying around and globules of energy doing cool stuff, So I like magic to be visible. I also like it to be rare in the context of the world and powerful, but not too rare in the story. I want it to frequently pop up in the story, even if in the setting of the world it's rare to people and scary and kind of unknown. I like character-driven plot, and I like quests over politics and war and concepts and stuff like that. So that's a little bit of my tastes when it comes to fantasy. I have felt starved for fantasy. I thought we were going to get a fantasy revolution in the cinema after the Lord of the Rings movies. Instead, we got a bunch of kind of young adult type of fantasy adaptations of book series and stuff, and we just didn't get the big, plethora of fantasy, serious fantasy movies that I was really hoping for. And so I've been waiting for movies or a TV show, especially one that could be well done, then I can get my dose on a weekly basis. That would be awesome. Did this one fit the bill? Well, let's talk about it a little bit, starting with the story, the script, and the pacing, that kind of stuff. The story pacing is pretty good. Just even setting aside, my connection to the books, because I actually haven't read the books in a long time. I still have them all on my bookshelf, and every decade or so, I suppose I come back to them. But I wasn't going into this like a purist, like they better do this series justice. No, I just wanted a cool fantasy series that was gonna hit on and scratch the itches that I personally have when it comes to watching fantasy in either movies or TV shows. So the pacing's pretty good. They immediately make a training exercise and a competition exciting, and then the stakes only get higher from there. There's a great mix of character scenes, which are really important to me, and also supernatural suspense, and then of course fantasy action. So I feel like the balancing of those different elements, they do a really good job. There are a few boring / irritating detours into young adult quote-unquote romance, and really I put that in quotes because all it is just shallow, sexy flirting. If you've seen a WB show like The Flash, Arrow, Smallville, way back in the day, Dawson's Creek, okay, you know what you're getting yourself into. I mean, it's just that kind of crap, and that does invade briefly every now and then, but these scenes were brief enough to not lose me and make me go like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, and they also definitely were not the center of the story. Still, I noticed that those elements were in there, and I've sensed the influence of the creators of Smallville, who who created this show as well. I hope that there are fewer bare backsides and butt cracks in the future. The latter was subtle and almost off camera, but still something that I don't want in my entertainment. The dialogue is strangely modern here and there. It does have an elevated style that you would expect from fantasy, slightly more formalized, but there are still expressions like guys and mom instead of like something more formal like mother or something like that, and every once in a while a few other expressions that are just shy of modern slang, but they're still just kind of relaxed and a little bit modern sounding. I can actually, as I thought about this, I was like, if this was another setting, I would have trouble with that. But I can get around it because this is the remnants of an ancient, modern, present-day world. And so maybe these expressions just kind of like they stayed with the culture, and they're still there. So, and I also haven't heard any present-day slang or like, I know, right? Or anything like that yet. So, still, I'd love for more of the book's expressions and slang to be present in the dialogue, such as the common curse in the books, shades, man, or shades, or I don't know if they said man, but shades, was a great curse, that I liked in the series. And so I hope that kind of finds its way into the dialogue as we go forward. There's still plenty of time for that. The story is largely serious in tone and surprisingly dark and violent at times. I mean, people like getting their guts ripped out of them by giant winged beasts, I was just really surprised at that. They're darker, actually. Well, I don't want to say darker than the books, because the books could be darker at times, but like compared to like say The Legend of the Seeker, which is based on a fantasy series by Terry Goodkind that is significantly darker than the Shannara series. That TV series, which really got bad and cheesy fast and way too lighthearted for the books that it was adapting. I'm just surprised that this show is a lot darker than that TV series was, given the comparison between the two series that they're made from. Let's see, where else? What else? Evil is evil and it's scary. I thought that was just really cool. That like it, I really felt the threat, the ominous threat of the evil, both in its unknown qualities and in its in-your-face, nasty-looking evil qualities. Characters are all developed enough, I felt, to get a sense of what drives them. I wasn't always feeling everything with them, but I felt like they were developed enough for me to know what drives them, and that's so important to me. Amberly, the princess, wants to serve a purpose, but then becomes frightened when a very heavy purpose is handed to her. She's the only one that can save the Elcrease, and she's the only one that's getting messages from it, and so it's really pretty intense for her. But yet she feels the responsibility to do what she can to save the Elcrease. Will Ohmsford watches helplessly as his mother dies near the beginning, and vows after that to equip himself to never be helpless to others who are in need again. Alanon, the druid, bears the burden of protecting the earth and having to forsake personal relationships in the process. That was interesting. They added a somewhat kind of romantic element to his backstory that I don't think was present in the books. At first I was like, oh, don't do this, because that's very WB-ish, and I just don't want that, But I felt like the way they handled it was really well. It wasn't like they handled it like, like an adult relationship that was a little bit more complex and had some history to it, Speaking of Al-Anon, I want to mention this because it's not in my notes later talking about the visual design, but he looks different from what I would have expected after reading the books. But I got used to it. I was like, oh, he looks a little bit more like Butch and like muscular and beefy and you know, I guess more like a warrior than like a wizard type. But yet the wardrobe and the way he plays himself, he works as the wizard type very well. But so I was like, oh, this is not what I expected, but I think I can get into this, and it's different, you know, it's different, and it's probably the reason they went with it was because we've seen in the Lord of the Rings and a few other places the kind of classic wizard look, and they wanted to go for something a little bit different, and so I was like, yeah, I think I can kind of, it's unexpected, but I can dig on this, you know. The Rover Girl, getting back to character motivations, Eretria, I think is how you say her name. She wants to be free from the manipulation and abuse of her father and the system she grew up under, yet she herself selfishly uses and steals from others in order to reach her goals. So I felt like there's just enough complexity and motivation given to these characters that I'm like, okay, all right, this is good. Now, I would have liked more time for each of these motives to be explored, but hopefully they'll be retraced and expanded on in future episodes rather than just counting on what they've set up in these two pilot episodes to, you know, keep us invested in them for the rest of the series. I really hope that they'll continue to retrace and then add to the motivations of these characters. So let's talk about the cast a little bit. I didn't recognize any of the main cast. I don't know why that is. Probably because they're probably all faces that have been in teen romance stuff. I don't know. I have no idea where these guys are from. But they all get off to a good start, I felt. None are outstanding to me, but they're all much better than I'd expect from a show created by the guys behind Smallville and a show that's also airing on MTV. I was very nervous when I learned that MTV was going to be showing this, that was going to be doing this show. It wasn't until I saw the trailers I was like, oh, maybe there's hope, you know. And then in the opening credits, I was like, oh no, it's is it Mark Miller, and is it Alfred Goff or Michael Goff? I can't remember. One of them is the butler in the Tim Burton Batman movies, and one of them is not. But anyway, Miller and Goff, or Gow, or however you say that guy's name, same guys that produced Smallville and a few other like teeny type dramas and superhero stuff. And so when I saw them in the opening credits, I was like, oh no. No. But I got a lot more than I expected from the characters, the actors in this. So that was great. They're maybe not a ton more than pretty faces to me at this point, but they're definitely more than their looks, and I think they have some great potential. Okay, so the production design I thought was great. The sets, the costumes, they look lived in and appropriately detailed and have a sense of history, and they're earthy at times, but still at other times clean and elegant when it's appropriate. There's a great cavernous ruins sequence, kind of like a brief little dungeon crawl with old crumbling tomes, and the makeup for the archvillain is easily on par with Lord of the Rings. So I don't think I could be a whole lot happier with the visual design. There were a few creatures that were, one or two I think, that were kind of CG creatures, but you know, for TV, they were fine. They were fine, you know? And what was happening in the story, like the way this one CG creature was ripping apart somebody else, I was just involved enough in the story and in the action to not be, you know, I guess I felt like even though it was a CG-looking creature, the way it was affecting the real world and the actors and the scene and stuff like that gave it some tangibility. Is that a word? So yeah, the CG, I've just learned to accept that, you know, I'm cursed with eyes that pick out CG, whatever, you know. So it was fine. It was fine. And I would even say good for television standards, you know. Let's see here. I could do without the occasional intrusion as far as like the music sound, you know, goes. There's the occasional intrusion of pop music, which you would expect in these types of young adult series. I prefer the more common orchestral music with subtle electronic elements, which you hear through most of these two episodes. But at least the pop music is somewhat ethereal and fits the setting better than what we could have gotten from the usual, whiny acoustic rock band that you're going to hear in young adult shows like this. Okay, so is there anything of moral, philosophical, significance that might trigger some thought or conversation? Well, the Shannara series is largely a general battle of good versus evil, and often deals with heroes needing to face the reality of evil in front of them rather than run away from it or deny its existence. And that theme is pretty central, I think, as each character has to sacrifice something in order to stop the coming evil, and the powers that be, the authorities, have to decide whether or not they're going to believe that the Elcrease is what the old stories say it is. It actually is holding back this army of demons, or whether they're going to follow the popular view that, it's just folklore, it's a nice tradition that we all kind of respect, and it has some value for that, but it's not more than that. And, really, that's our story today. Like many of the elves in this pilot who think the Elcrease is just a big tree, we can ignore the signs and refuse to believe that the Bible is more than folklore. But if we do that, we're only going to be overtaken by evil forever. And the same is true for us day to day as people who are believers in Christ, who are believers in the truth claims of the Bible. We can still choose to ignore the sin issues that are going on in our lives and say, oh, it's not that big a deal, or just not think about it, or convince ourselves that the Bible really doesn't teach against that. We can just kind of do little mind games with ourselves, and in order to ignore sin issues. But when we do that, we miss out. We won't lose our eternal life by ignoring sin issues, but we'll miss out on some rewards, and we'll cause just kind of destruction in both our own lives and the lives of those around us. So I think those are some relevant themes. They're not unusual or terribly unique, so I think that they're easily missed while you're watching this, but I think they're certainly there. Terry Brooks eventually tied the Shannara books to the continuity of his Word and Void series, as I said earlier, which I hope doesn't happen here, because in the Word and Void series, which is set in present-day America, the reader is ultimately asked to treat the claims of the Bible as false in an indirect way. It just presents an alternate worldview of good and evil that is not compatible with the Bible. It's more Eastern and Star Wars-y and ultimately nonsensical as you really chase it down. So I'm hopeful that the world building in this show will just kind of leave explorations of the sources of ultimate good and evil off the table if that's the route they go. I'd rather they just keep to the simplistic issue of, okay, there's good, there's evil, and there's a battle going on between them. How do we deal with that? I think that what they're dealing with right now, those are great themes, and there's lots of truth in those themes, and if they stick to exploring those as opposed to chasing the rabbit hole of, okay, where does ultimate good and ultimate evil come from, then I think I'll be a happier camper. All right, so since I have no idea what your tastes are, I'll just talk to myself if I were a time traveler. Pater, you got to go watch this. Watch it on Amazon. The first 2 episodes are available for free. And they run much better on Amazon than they do on the MTV site. There's kind of some stuttering and stuff, so don't waste your time there. Just start watching them for free on Amazon. Now, I don't have cable, but as a guy who used to buy multiple comics each week for $3.99 a pop, I will gladly fork out the same or a little more for weekly episodes of this show if this quality continues. The potential for it to settle into an annoyingly WB-ish groove of shallow relationship drama is there. We'll just see. I mean, pilots are sometimes lies. You just don't know until about 3 or 4 episodes in. What's the normal groove of this show going to be like, as opposed to, whatever they're trying to suck us in with at the beginning. If there's just tons of special effects and, a naked butt and more backsides and stuff. We really don't know a lot of times what a show is going to be like until about 3 or 4 episodes after the initial pilot. So I'll have a better idea deeper into the season, whether or not I'm going to stick with this. But if it keeps to the pattern established in these episodes, this is the fantasy TV series I've been waiting my whole life for. I want to live in this world, and it makes me want to play specifically Elder Scrolls Oblivion. I think it's not quite as dark and earthy as Skyrim. It has a little bit more of kind of like an elegant, elevated, polished feel to it, like there was in the world of Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Or it makes me even want to get back into reading the Shannara books. Maybe even some of those books that bridge the 2 sets of series that I was having a little bit of trouble with and gave up on. I might even go back and pick up where I left off in one of those. So it leaves me with a lot of itches scratched, but still hungry for more. I really enjoyed it. It's rated TV-14, which means something different evidently than it used to because of like the naked butt that was in there. And again, it was subtle and almost off camera, but it was still there, you know. So I would say it's probably a PG-13 equivalent for violence and sexuality. Now, I don't like scoring in particular, but if you like numbers, how about an 8.5 for quality? That's a B score. I maybe enjoyed it more than a B because it scratched a lot of itches in particular for me. But if I try to say like, okay, what are my usual standards for quality as I look at this and kind of setting aside my personal itches for fantasy, nerdy stuff that I would like, it's probably about an 8.5. I maybe enjoyed it as much as a 9, but I'll say 8.5, and I don't really care about numbers anyway, so who cares? But if you do, there you go. You do what you want with that. For relevance, I don't know, 6.5, that's a D letter grade, so I don't think that it's going to jump out and demand thought and conversation about these issues, but they're there if you want to like really dig for them and you're really looking for themes to think and talk about. All right, so those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. I mean, is this what you hoped for? Are you a Shannara fan and you're like, you know, this is great or this is terrible or whatever, or do you know nothing about Shannara but you like fantasy? I'd really be curious to get kind of your reactions to the pilot episode. And then I hope you join us over at ChristianGeekCentral.com, boom, as we continue to geek out, get the button ready, and seek the truth. Ha ha!